It is the most elusive treasure of them all, the cup of Christ, used at the Last Supper and imbued with miraculous powers.
It was really the answer to whatever it is you need, the ultimate balm, the ultimate healing thing, the solution to one's problems.
The Holy Grail has bewitched treasure hunters for over a millennium. And Heinrich Himmler, the head of the Nazi SS, would become obsessed with finding it.
Don't underestimate Heinrich Himmler. What he wants, he gets.
He scoured the world in his search and was said to have sent special forces on top-secret missions.
Who better to send on your Grail quest than Otto Skorzeny, the ultimate one-man Nazi fighting machine?
And he placed the resources of the SS in the hands of Germany's foremost Grail hunter.
Otto Rahn was really the real Indiana Jones,
who would eventually give his life in the ultimate Nazi treasure hunt. This is the story of Himmler's quest for the Holy Grail. Berlin, 1933. The Nazis are in full control of Germany. Otto Rahn, a young cash-strapped writer, is heading to a meeting. He is answering a mysterious telegram. An anonymous benefactor has offered Rahn 1,000 Reichmarks a month, a very impressive wage, to write a book. The meeting is at 7 Prinz Albertstrasse. Rahn has no idea who will be waiting for him.
He goes there, and who should he see but Heinrich Himmler himself.
Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler was the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany, second only to Adolf Hitler. Himmler was the head of the SS, a fearsome paramilitary organization which controlled much of the Nazi state. He charged Rahn with a remarkable, almost unbelievable mission: to find the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is the most sought-after treasure in history.
The Holy Grail is the cup of the Last Supper, the cup of Christ, that is meant to have been used to celebrate the First Communion.
It is commonly believed that the same cup was used by the disciple, Joseph of Arimathea, to catch the blood of Christ whilst he was nailed to the cross. But other legends say it is even older than that the Grail was used by Abraham, the founding patriarch of the Jewish people.
There are other people, of course, who think that it's the cup of Abraham. And this cup apparently became part of the sacred treasure of the Jews and was carried around with the Ark of the Covenant.
Over the years, the legend of the Grail has grown and been embellished. Sometimes it is said to be a stone or a plate, but most commonly, it is a chalice. Whatever it is, all the legends agree that the Grail possesses miraculous powers. For the Grail is supposed to provide its holder with eternal life.
Grail is really the answer to whatever it is you need, the thing that will fill you up when you're empty, that will heal you when you're wounded. It's kind of the ultimate balm, the ultimate healing thing, the solution to one's problems.
Such is its mystique. The Grail has obsessed treasure hunters for centuries. Tales abound of crusader knights searching for it, whilst they laid waste to lands in the Middle East. And in legend, many of the stories of the mythical King Arthur and his knights concern their quest for the Grail. But despite thousands of years of searching, no one has ever found it. But why would Himmler want such an item? Not only was he a fanatical Nazi, it seems he held some other very unusual beliefs. He was obsessed with mystery, legend, astrology, the occult, and Germany's pagan past.
Himmler fundamentally was, today we would call him a geek. He was the type of guy who was massively into Tolkien. He'd be playing Warhammer every day. He was just a nerd, if you like. I mean, there's no other word to describe him.
Well, Heinrich Himmler was obviously an extremely strange man, but he was in a position of extraordinary power.
Don't underestimate Heinrich Himmler. What he wants, he gets.
Himmler shaped his SS on the traditions of Germany's pre-Christian tribes. He promoted a cult of ancestor worship, and within the SS, Christian festivals would be replaced with pagan holidays. Instead of Christmas and Easter, Himmler had his SS celebrate the winter and spring solstices. Officers were married in SS rituals called Ehrweihe. SS naming ceremonies replaced christenings. It was as if he were attempting to create a new Nazi religion.
By reawakening the old gods and the ancient traditions of their Germanic ancestors, they hoped to create a new order that would dominate Europe for the next 1,000 years.
Even the design of the SS insignia reflected Himmler's obsession with Germany's pagan past. It was two Sieg runes, occult symbols of a long-dead Germanic people.
You've got this creation of a kind of whole mythology which starts to become a real, quote-unquote, religion. You've got all these sort of elements that the Nazis want to include, and if you're trying to create a religion, if you want to look how to do it, well, you should just study Himmler and what he got up to, because in many ways, he was the perfect kind of cult leader. And that's what Nazism became, and that's what the religion behind Nazism became. It was basically a cult.
Himmler's obsession with mysticism led him to focus on one of the greatest legends of all: the legend of the Holy Grail. He selected for his headquarters Wewelsburg Castle in northeast Germany. He installed a round table and a ritual chamber in the basement of the north-facing tower. He named rooms after King Arthur and the Holy Grail. This was to be Himmler's Camelot, a castle for his new knightly order.
He wanted the SS to be a kind of breed of Teutonic knights. And he wanted to blend Arthurian myth with actual present-day, real, mechanized military machine. He wanted to have those same sort of knightly virtues that you read about in Grail legends.
Now he had his castle and his knights. There was one last thing he needed.
Now, what better to have in your knightly Arthurian-style castle than the Grail itself?
And that was why Rahn had been summoned to meet Himmler. Because Rahn was Germany's leading expert on the Holy Grail. Otto Rahn was born in 1904. He grew up during the horrors of the First World War. As an escape, he immersed himself in legends and mythology.
He was enamored by all the myths and legends of the old days, because the present was not so nice. So that he fled back in books and stories, and the stories of Wodan and Donor and all the Nordic stories.
His favorite myth, very popular in Germany, was about one of King Arthur's knights of the Round Table, Percival, known in Germany as Parsifal. The best-known version of the story was written by Wolfgang von Eschenbach in the 13th century. In the tale, a young Parsifal searches for the elusive Grail. In Eschenbach's version, the Grail is not a cup, but a rock.
The Grail is described as a hard, dark stone, which is contained in a reliquary. And Eschenbach says whoever has this stone or is near to it will have eternal life and will be healed.
According to the legend, Parsifal eventually finds the Grail in a mythical castle which Eschenbach calls Munsalbesch.
Experience the past like never before with History Hit's award-winning original documentaries and ad-free podcasts with our expert historians like Dan Snow, Susanna Lipscomb, Lucy Worsley, Mary Beard, Tristan Hughes and myself, Matt Lewis. Sign up for an exclusive discount using the link in the description and embark on your historical journey from the wonders of ancient Egypt and the life of Anne Boleyn to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and the discovery of Shackleton's endurance. Get history wherever, whenever, exclusively on History Hit.
Rahn became captivated with the tale, believing that Munsalbesch was a real place and that the Parsifal story was actually true. He was convinced that by studying it, he could find the castle. And if he could find Munsalbesch, then he would find the Grail. The young Rahn threw himself into researching these myths.
I think Otto became enthused with the idea of actually finding the truth behind these legends. Also, he had a very methodical German mind. He was trying to really back-engineer the myth by finding the historical personages that became the figures in mythology. We can see in his work that there's maps and genealogies.
After years of researching, Rahn eventually discovered a clue. He found it in the songs of the troubadours, the travelling poets of the medieval courts of France.
Otto Rahn rightly decided that the troubadour songs were really the only authentic record of what had happened. That a lot of the written records had been destroyed, but through oral tradition, through the songs and through the legends, echoes of what had really come down still survived into the present day.
In some of these songs, the troubadours sang of a medieval religious sect called the Cathars. The Cathars were said to have owned great treasures, including a sacred relic, a rock that had fallen from heaven. Rahn was sure that this relic must be the Holy Grail, as described by Eschenbach. The Cathars certainly were real. They were a 12th century religious sect, predominantly from the Languedoc region of southwest France.
What we call Catharism is really a variant of Christianity which believed that you needed no intermediaries between man and God, that any individual could have direct communion with the divine, which meant that the entire hierarchy of priests, prelates, cardinals, the entire church was kind of irrelevant, which also bugged Catholicism no end.
The Pope branded the Cathars heretics, and a vicious crusade was launched against them.
And this religious group of people were hunted down by the Roman Catholic Church because they opposed the Roman Catholic Church.
Across southern France, the Cathars were slaughtered in their thousands by the forces of the Pope. The last remaining Cathars were besieged in a mountain fortress called Montségur.
Montségur was the place where the Cathars held their last stand in 1244. This is when the armies surrounded the castle for 10 months.
Eventually the odds were just too much for them, 10,000 against approximately 300 fighting men. after a 16-day truce. The surviving Cathars under their last priest, Bertrand Marty, were chained by the hands and the neck and dragged down the mountain at dawn, hanging them, cutting their throats as a way of destroying the faith once and for all.
And finally, after they surrendered, 200 Cathars were burned at the stake. So it is gone into history as the last stand of the Cathars.
All of this was verifiable fact. But if, as Rahn believed, the stories of the troubadours were also true, what had happened to the Cathar treasure and the Holy Grail?
When the Crusaders entered the castle, there was no trace of the mythical treasure, the infinite amounts of money they had expected. And over the years, various legends and rumors have accrued around what actually happened to the treasure of the Cathars, the treasures of the faith.
Rahn uncovered local stories which said that the Cathars had managed to smuggle their treasure out of the castle before it fell.
There was a very enduring story, a myth perhaps, that there were 4 of the Cathars who were hidden in the castle against the terms of the ceasefire, who apparently escaped the night before the burning, carrying with them the legendary Holy Grail. People started to believe that it had been smuggled out.
The escaping Cathars, according to this legend, then hid the Grail somewhere in the network of caves and caverns which run for miles throughout the mountains. Rahn became convinced that the legend was true and that the Grail had to be hidden at Montségur.
I can see Rahn's thinking in that he thought that these really were the places described in the original myth. And he was certainly very, very enthused and excited by what he had found.
Otto was quite sure that he had to find the Grail here, that this must have been the place where they hid it.
Even before being summoned by Himmler, Rahn had travelled to Montségur, a beautiful, remote area of the French Pyrenees. He was sure that the Grail could be found in the uncharted mountains of this region. He spent years exploring the area.
All these places were completely off the map at that point. No one knew about this history or about the existence of the caves or the castles.
The work was difficult and treacherous, but undeterred, Rahn sunk more and more of his money into the quest.
Where he took over the lease on a small hotel, which was really a front for his continued explorations of the area. He started to really methodically work his way through all the cave systems. Certainly had his work cut out. It's the largest limestone district in Europe. And he wasn't a trained archaeologist. In fact, he was a trained etymologist. But he certainly got his hands dirty.
Otto Rahn was really the real Indiana Jones. He was out there. He was into the woods, he was climbing caves, he was climbing castles, he was searching for relics and searching for treasure.
Eventually, he had a breakthrough. Deep in the caves, he found childlike engravings, which he copied in his notebook. In a cavern known as the Bethlehem Grotto, he discovered a strange pentagonal depression carved into the wall. He believed that Cathars once stood in the pentagram when they were being initiated into the order. Rahn also uncovered human skeletons in the caves, which he believed were Cathar remains. To Rahn, this was solid evidence that the Cathars had brought the Grail here. If he could only explore deeper into the caves, Rahn was sure that he would eventually find it. But after years of expensive explorations, Rahn ran out of money.
Otto left France under something of a cloud. He was unable to make the payments on the hotel he'd taken over, and he hadn't been able to pay his staff, and there were in fact legal proceedings against him.
When he returned to Germany, all he had to show for his efforts were notes for a book. But unknown to Rahn, a copy of his book would fall into the hands of the one man in Germany who had both the resources and the will to relaunch his expedition: Heinrich Himmler.
Before the Nazis came to power, people like Otto Rahn were, these kind of weedy, inconsequential figures. They're obsessed with finding the Holy Grail. This was something no one really took seriously. But then suddenly you get this whole new regime that takes these things extremely seriously.
Rahn had never shown any interest in the politics of the Nazis. But now Heinrich Himmler would provide a solution to the biggest problem he faced in his quest for the Grail. Because he offered Rahn the one thing he needed: money.
He was told that the SS would take over funding his research, that they'd give him all the money he needed to continue his search. The only catch being you'd have to wear a black uniform and report to his superiors.
Rahn now found himself in the SS, an organization recruited from the Aryan elite of Nazi Germany. Its members were required to prove their ethnic purity and trace their German bloodline, often as far back as the 18th century. It ran some of the most intimidating branches of the Nazi state, including concentration camps and the secret police. Despite this, Rahn seemed to have no concerns about joining.
When you don't have any money and somebody offers you 1,000 Reichsmark a month, and the only thing you have to do that is to join the SS. And you could have a carte blanche, you could go anywhere in Europe and do your hobby. Otto's hobby was to research. So he said, yeah, I'll take the money, I'll go find, treasures and stuff. Why not?
In 1936, on Himmler's orders, Unterscharführer Rahn joined one of the strangest and most unusual outfits in the SS, a unit entirely staffed by academics. It was called the Ahnenerbe.
If you want the classic example of how the Nazis manipulated intellectualism and academic behavior, you can go no further than look at the Ahnenerbe. This was an institution set up ultimately by Himmler to research, quote-unquote, German ancestry. And it was to look at how you could construct a mythology of Aryanism and Germanic culture.
Himmler believed the Germans were a master race, set aside from all others by their nobility and purity. The Ahnenerbe's task was to provide intellectual proof for this claim.
The Ahnenerbe is very much Himmler's baby. These are his academics, these are his scientists, these are his historians, these are his archaeologists, and they're there ultimately to do one thing, to prove that Himmler's right. Unfortunately, he's completely wrong.
As an academic, joining the Ahnenerbe was the equivalent of selling your soul, because to be a member, you would be asked to prove things that were not true. For example, Himmler even wanted the Ahnenerbe to prove that Jesus was not Jewish.
They were creating their own Bible, an Aryan Bible, a Bible in which Jesus was an Aryan.
The Ahnenerbe claimed that Jesus was part of a tribal group which was not Semitic, but Aryan.
Difficult to believe that you could take Judaism out of the Bible, but that's what the Nazis were doing, and they literally did it. They created an Aryan Bible.
Although it might seem ridiculous, the work of the Ahnenerbe was not harmless.
One's got to be very, very careful not just to write off the Ahnenerbe as a bunch of harmless cranks. No, these people are willingly subverting their own knowledge, their own academic excellence in order to prove something that will later be used to murder people.
But for the moment, Rahn turned a blind eye. In return, he got lavishly funded in his quest for the Grail. With Himmler's backing, Rahn threw himself into his research with renewed vigor and soon published a second book, Lucifer's Court. It was based on new research and on his earlier explorations of the caves around Montségur, where he was convinced the Cathars had hidden the Grail. Himmler was impressed with Rahn's progress. On Reichsführer's order, 5,000 copies of Rahn's book were bound in the finest leather and distributed to the Nazi elite.
Otto's books, first Crusade Against the Grail and his sequel, Court of Lucifer, rapidly became compulsory reading at a certain level of promotion within the SS. If you rose above a certain rank, you were required to read Rahn, and I bet a lot of people really cursed at the idea of having to plough through that material.
With Himmler's backing, Rahn swiftly rose through the ranks of the SS, even though he was not typical SS material.
He was a scholar, an academic, a writer, a poet, and not a warrior. He was a terrible soldier. He was not a great physical specimen. He smoked too much. He was very he wasn't very useful on the exercise ground. He was very poor with a gun. He was still promoted very rapidly and ended up as an Obergruppenführer.
But his new power and riches came at a terrible cost to his integrity. Reading proofs of his new book, Rahn discovered that someone had inserted anti-Semitic passages. Rahn chose to ignore this. Still, his only interest was in finding the Grail.
It was a devil's deal, and I think he was perhaps too quick to pick up on.
Himmler would now send Rahn all over Europe to find the Grail.
Rahn is dispatched to any number of locations. There's a lot of letters from the time where Otto is asking permission to visit various sites and excavate various sites, and it's just literally lists of place names.
He visited Europe's most famous pagan sites. He conducted excavations and visited pre-Christian monuments around the continent, including the Exensteiner, a towering rock formation in northwestern Germany where ancient Germanic tribes had worshipped for centuries. Himmler even dispatched Rahn as far as Iceland, at the head of an SS expedition searching for the Grail. But despite a worldwide quest lasting over 2 years, Rahn couldn't find it.
The fact that he couldn't find the physical Grail made him very nervous, because he couldn't really please Himmler the way he wanted to please him.
Little by little, Rahn began to lose Himmler's confidence.
There's an increasing desperation in the way that Otto attempted to safeguard his position. He was desperate to try and come up with some kind of material evidence for Himmler, to try and show that he was actually of value to the Nazi party after all.
And when Rahn returned from one of his trips, he began to see the SS for what it really was. A terrifying force that oppressed and brutalized its victims.
Really, it became a kind of a state within a state, almost like a parallel form of the police force of the army.
Otto was away a lot, so he didn't really see it much. And when he did come home in Germany, he noticed the change, he noticed the difference.
Suddenly it had become clear to Rahn the danger he was in for failing to find the Grail.
I think he realized his days were numbered.
He started to drink, he started to smoke.
a general sense of panic seems to have set in. Things began to fall apart.
Rahn desperately hoped that Heinrich Himmler would give him more time. But Himmler had run out of patience. In 1937, Himmler stripped Rahn of his rank. Rahn was sent to act as a guard at the notorious Dachau and Buchenwald concentration camps. The concentration camps were built by the Nazis to imprison political and social undesirables. At that time, inmates in Buchenwald included socialists, communists, gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, and homosexuals, who were herded into inhuman conditions.
He saw people being hurt, beaten up, murdered. He wanted to get out of there quick. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. He wanted to flee. He wanted to go somewhere else, live somewhere else. He asked several times to live here in France, but it was denied. He didn't really want to be part of the Germany that it had become.
He wrote to a friend,
"I have much sorrow in my country. Impossible for a tolerant, liberal man like me to live in a nation that my native country has become."
He was scared out of his senses.
There was a particular reason that what Rahn had seen at Buchenwald filled him with terror. Because he was hiding a dangerous secret. He was himself homosexual.
He had covered this up from the SS from the very beginning because obviously homosexuality, just like being Jewish, was something which would get one sent to the camps. Certainly a lot of people died for the same reasons.
And there was something even worse. Rahn wasn't a pure-blooded Aryan. He was Jewish.
He had Jewish roots through his mother, Clara, and which succeeded in covering up for quite a long period of time.
As a member of the SS, Rahn was required to prove he was of pure Aryan descent. It was something he had been deliberately avoiding.
There's also the matter of his Ahnenpass, the certificate of racial purity that he was meant to fill out, which he never submitted.
An Ahnenpass needed to show 4 generations of a pure German bloodline. For Rahn to have submitted his would have been tantamount to suicide. He had hoped that if he could find the Grail, then no one would be concerned about his Ahnenpass. But he had failed to find it. And in 1939, his luck finally ran out.
People found out that his parents, especially his mother, was Jewish. And it was obvious that he was gay. There were so many people saying it, proving it to his superiors.
A gay Jewish SS officer could not survive long in Nazi Germany. Coupled with his failure to find the Grail, Rahn's options were narrowing.
Plainly, Otto's position within the SS became untenable. He must have realized that it was suicidal to stay.
In March 1939, Rahn traveled to the German-Austrian border. High in the snow-covered Alps, he headed out into the mountains. Here, winter temperatures sit well below freezing. Rahn took with him only a bottle of whiskey and some sleeping pills.
It is interesting that it was very close to the 16th of March, to the anniversary of the fall of the Chateau of Montsegur and the burning of the Cathar martyrs. Maybe he chose that date deliberately.
I think he chose the Endura, the death of the Cathars, to sit in the forest, in the middle of the forest on a mountain slope with a magnificent view took a couple of bottles of sleeping tablets, knowing that he wouldn't wake up because he would freeze to death that night.
A notice in a Nazi newspaper reported it as a tragic death of an outstanding SS officer and scientist. In 1939, Europe descended into war. Himmler's SS were in the thick of the fighting. But even so, the Reichsfuhrer continued his search for the Grail throughout the war.
Yeah, one might readily have assumed that the death of their Parsifal, their lead Grail hunter, might have closed down the whole program. But this wasn't entirely the end of Himmler's interest in the occult and the archaeological oddities of the past.
In 1940, Himmler accompanied Hitler on a mission to Barcelona to convince Spanish dictator General Franco to bring Spain into the war. But Himmler had an ulterior motive for traveling with the Führer to Spain. He had a new lead for the Grail. It took Himmler to Montserrat Abbey in the Pyrenean Mountains, an hour from Barcelona. An abbey built on the foundations of an ancient castle. The SS had uncovered an age-old Catalonian folk song about a Grail-like mystical font of life at that castle. Himmler now believed that the Grail castle might not be Montségur in France, but instead Montserrat in Spain. Himmler ordered that the sole German-speaking monk at the abbey, Andrew Ripple Noble, should help him with the quest. But if the monk knew anything, he decided against telling Himmler, and the Reichsfuhrer left Spain empty-handed. However, it seems that Himmler's quest did not end there. The next stage of the story would be taken up by an American author, Howard Buchner, in 1991. As a young man in 1945, Buchner was part of the American advance through Europe. Like Rahn, he would become fascinated with the legend of the Grail.
Colonel Howard Buchner had been a surgeon with the American Army 3rd Battalion and was allegedly the first Allied doctor to enter Dachau.
There, he supposedly uncovered information from a captured SS officer, which he included in his book about the Nazi quest for the Grail.
Buchner wrote a book called Emerald Cup, a very curious book.
According to Buchner's sources, now that Himmler had ruled out Spain, he once again focused his attentions on the French Pyrenees. But this time, he decided on a radically different approach. Frustrated with the efforts of academics such as Rahn, Himmler now called upon one of the Reich's greatest military heroes to take up the quest. Otto Skorzeny.
He's a bear of a man. He's very tall, he's very charming, he's very imposing, he's got a dueling scar down one of his cheeks, and in many ways he's a pretty unreconstructed Nazi.
Skorzeny was the chief of Germany's special troops, the most famous and feared commando in the German army. Bold, fearless, and a hero to the Nazi faithful.
Buchner claims that Himmler had dispatched none other than Otto Skorzeny, the famous paratrooper and commando, allegedly the most dangerous man in the world, to retrieve the sacred treasure.
Himmler's tried the academics, he's tried the boffins. Why don't we send Otto Skorzeny?
Skorzeny was more than qualified for the task. In September 1943, he had led a daring raid on a prison in the Italian Alps to free the captured Italian dictator, Benito Mussolini. Dropping in by glider with a squadron of elite German commandos, they came under heavy fire. But Skorzeny would ensure the mission's success and his own glory by returning with Mussolini alive.
He's, in many ways, represents kind of the ultimate one-man Nazi fighting machine. Now, who better to send on your Grail quest, supposedly, than Otto Skorzeny?
So, according to Buchner, in March 1944, Himmler charged Skorzeny with yet another top-secret mission. But this time, to the castle of Montségur in France to find the Grail. Skorzeny decided to look again at Rahn's theory that the Grail had been taken out of the castle 700 years before by escaping Cathars.
Colonel Howard Buchner believed that Otto Skorzeny was able to look at the chateau with a military mind and imagine how such a feat might be possible.
Until now, nobody could understand how the Cathars could have escaped. 3 sides of the castle were besieged by thousands of soldiers, and the remaining side backed onto an impassable precipice. But by studying this cliff, Skorzeny had a revelation.
One side of the castle is this sheer cliff, and obviously everyone thinks, well, the Grail can't be hidden there because that's impossible. There's no way they could have done that. But Skorzeny, because he's this supposed tactical military genius, is the first person to say, but what if it is hidden there?
Skorzeny worked out that by using ropes, the escaping Cathars could have lowered themselves unseen over the castle walls and down the cliff face. If he was right, everyone else had been looking on the wrong side of the mountain.
Skorzeny quickly assumed that the Cathars would have taken the least likely route out of the castle and escaped down the sheer side of the cliff. And according to Buchner, he swiftly picked up their trail from the base of the cliff.
Six days after Skorzeny was said to have arrived at Montségur, it was the anniversary of the Cathar massacre.
March the 16th, 1944 was the 700th anniversary of the fall of the chateau.
A small group of local people chose to mark the occasion with a simple ceremony at the base of the castle. Then, something unexpected happened.
The story has it that while they were getting together on the mountain, that a German aircraft flew overhead.
It's the 700th anniversary of the massacre of the Cathars, and the plane makes a cross, a Cathar cross, in the sky.
Howard Buchner claims that this was a sign from Himmler that Skorzeny had been successful in his mission in recovering the Emerald Cup.
But could this be true? Had Skorzeny really succeeded where everyone else had failed and found the Grail? Buchner's story is certainly entertaining, but there is one fundamental problem with his account. And that concerns Otto Skorzeny.
Whenever you hear the name Otto Skorzeny mentioned in connection with any fantastical story, to me that's a really important signifier that the story is almost certainly going to be an absolute pile of rubbish.
Although Skorzeny was a real person, captured by the Allies at the end of the war, he could not have led this mission.
By linking Skorzeny's alleged retrieval of the Holy Grail to the 700th anniversary of the fall of the castle, it means that he would have to have been here on the 16th of March, 1944.
But the Allies have proof that Otto Skorzeny was not in France in March 1944. He was in Yugoslavia, where the Germans were involved in vicious fighting.
Now, the truth is, when he was supposed to have been supposedly finding the Holy Grail in France, he was in fact, somewhere near the Eastern Front.
Buchner's story gets even wilder, with the Grail being taken by Nazi U-boat to Antarctica, where it is placed in a cave of ice in a secret Nazi base in the Mühlig-Hoffmann Mountains.
I mean, all of it makes for a wonderful story, and certainly after the Indiana Jones movies, we love the idea of uniformed Nazi stormtroopers ransacking the castles of the Pyrenees.
I mean, this is fun, but it's just not true.
But even though Buchner's story is just fantasy, the story of the Nazi hunt for the Grail is not. Heinrich Himmler was obsessed with mysticism, and he did fund expensive expeditions for the Grail, including Reims. But he never found it, because in all probability, it never even existed. Heinrich Himmler was eventually captured by the Allies at the end of the war and committed suicide whilst in British custody.
This is the house in Lüneburg where Himmler committed suicide. In that room, the most despicable of all German criminals contrived to take poison after arrest.
But the horrifying truth is that millions of people across Europe would lose their lives on the direct orders of this man. Orders which the Nazis attempted to justify through the work of the Ahnenerbe and men like the Grail hunter Otto Rahn.
It's one of the greatest stories ever told, a delight for generations of schoolchildren. But could Noah and the Ark actually be true? Three American Christians were convinced it was. They were prepared to face danger and death.
Its name in Turkish is Are Dag. It's the mountain of pain.
People have been killed over the years. We had one man that was shot.
He was cut, literally cut from head to toe, from all the rocks.
But it was worth all that pain. These men were on a quest for far more than personal glory. They were willing to risk their lives because they believed all the events in the Bible actually took place. Finding Noah's Ark would be the ultimate proof. Of all the tales in the Bible, Noah and his Ark is perhaps the most fabulous. It has been a staple for Hollywood ever since the movies began, not to mention a dominant subject for Western art. Fed up with their sins, a vengeful God decides to wipe out the entire human race and start again. The one good man on earth, Noah, and his family will be saved. God orders them to build a giant ark, 300 cubits, roughly 450 feet long, and to take into it a male and female of every animal, so that when the flood is over, life can start again. But is this all just a story, or could it possibly be true? In the 1980s, there was one American who was determined to find out. Even if it meant searching for an ancient boat on a massive mountain in bandit country where the locals worshipped a very different god. But then this explorer was used to hostile environments.
Liftoff. We have liftoff at 9:34 landing some daylight time.
Colonel James Irwin was one of the pioneers of space travel.
Oh boy, it's beautiful out here. Boy, it's a nice little crater, isn't it?
In 1971, he was the lunar module pilot of Apollo 15 and became only the 8th person to walk on the surface of the moon.
Look at that. I think we found what we came for. Crystal and rock, huh? Yes, sir. You better believe it.
He spent 3 days there, moonwalking and collecting samples, including the Genesis rock.
Joe, this crater is a gold mine. And there might be diamonds in the next one.
To the untrained eye, it looked like just another rock, but its large crystals showed it to be a section of primal lunar crust, formed during the earliest history of the solar system. It was a key to many mysteries. It stands as a major clue in unraveling the formative processes of the moon, the Earth, and the planet.
That rock made Jim Irwin famous. It was named after the book of Genesis, the first part of the Bible which tells the story of the creation of the world. According to the Bible, this happened some 6,000 years ago, but when scientists actually examined the rock, they announced it was a lot older, some several billion years. But what the public didn't know was that something else took place to Colonel Irwin on the moon, which was far more profound, at least for him.
Contact. Bam. Roger, roger, Falcon.
What drove him these last 20 years of his life was the experience on the moon. He would have problems on the moon, like the lunar rover wouldn't work.
The lunar rover was the vehicle that had been developed especially to cope with the precarious conditions on the moon's surface. But it developed a major problem. The steering wouldn't work.
I don't have any front steering, Joe. It's like just rear steering, Dave. Yeah.
The mission was in jeopardy. They had come all that way for nothing.
Okay, we're moving forward, Joe. Roger.
This was an all-wheel drive, and not all the wheels were working, and they worked on it and couldn't figure it out.
Nobody at Mission Control, 250,000 miles away in Houston, Texas, had any idea what to do. That night, Jim Irwin prayed to God.
Oh, it's nice to be outside where you can stretch a little bit.
The next morning, his prayers were answered.
August 1st, Scott and Irwin prepared for their second day on the moon. And as Scott checked the inoperative forward steering of the rover...
You know what I bet you did last night, Joe? You let some of those Marshall guys come up here and fix it, didn't you? It works, Dave? Yes, sir. It's working, my friend. Beautiful.
It worked fine. They didn't do anything. They just started, and he says there was instances throughout the flight where he just felt God's hand was so present.
Oh, look at the mountains today, Jim, when they're all sunlit. Isn't that beautiful? It really is. By golly, that's just super. Dave, I'm reminded of a favorite biblical passage from Psalm. I look unto the hills, from whence cometh my help.
And he kept looking over his shoulder because he just felt somebody else was there. And he later said it had to be God. And it really impacted his life, and it changed his whole perspective. And so when he came back from the moon, he dedicated the rest of his life to spreading the message of who God was.
Jim Owen was now a man with a new mission. He retired from space travel and set up his high flight ministry. He wanted people to become committed to the Bible, to believe, like him, that every phrase was directly inspired by God, that every word of it was true. Jim Owen became a creationist.
Thank you, Lord. It's so good to be able to brag on our God, isn't it? He's higher than any other. Hallelujah. The word said he inhabits our praises. Give him praise right now. Let him inhabit where you are right now in your life.
Scientists have criticized the views of creationists for decades.
Give him praise this morning.
But that hasn't stopped their churches being full every Sunday. Others might ridicule them, but here in Manassas, Northern Virginia, they are quite convinced that evolution is wrong. They believe that men and women were created just 6,000 years ago, just as the Bible says. And what better way to prove it than to find the ship of Noah? It would transform not only our understanding of the origin of species, it would even be clear evidence for the existence of God. Now that was a challenge worthy of Jim Owen's enthusiasm and commitment. It would combine his love of adventure with his new commitment to God. He read his Bible more carefully than ever before.
If it said it in the Bible, it was fact for Jim. And so the fact that in Genesis it speaks about the Ark of Noah, and it just stirred inside of him the thrill of exploration. I can be a part of something of biblical proportions that would affect the whole of mankind. So he delved into all he could to find where it might be and how to go about finding it.
So in between meeting world leaders and heads of state, he planned his second great expedition. This time, not with fellow astronauts, but with family and friends, including his new son-in-law.
We were on a run up in Boulder, Colorado. We came to a high spot overlooking the city, and he goes, you know, I'm thinking of heading to Turkey to look for the Ark of Noah. Would you be interested?
Interested? John could hardly contain his enthusiasm.
To me, it was an adventure with the man who had walked on the moon. What would you say, but how soon? When can we go? Tomorrow?
But if space travel had taught Jim Owen anything about exploration, it was the importance of preparation. And so they started practicing on the hills near their home in Colorado Springs.
We spent the next year getting in shape physically and preparing and going to the store and buying the equipment that we would need. It was great fun.
But for Colonel Owen, it was much more than that. There could be no greater prize than finding Noah's Ark. It truly would be one small step for man, one giant step for mankind. And the amazing thing was, the Bible had told him where to look. The book of Genesis was quite clear. After the Great Flood, Noah's Ark had come to rest here on the mountains of Ararat. Not quite as remote as the moon, but close. On this volcanic rock, it can be 32 degrees in the summer, minus 20 in the winter. The top is permanently covered in snow and ice.
It's a hard mountain to climb. It has a 45-degree angle. though we go zigzag back and forth like a mountain goat, it's still hard on your heart and your endurance.
Climbers suffer frostbitten toes and fingers. 2 died of hypothermia in 2006.
This mountain goes up and down with canyons, crevices, gorges that are very, very dangerous.
Even in the relatively benign foothills, there are wolf dogs and brown bears.
It's a fairly hostile environment. We call it the rock pile, and its name in Turkish is Ağrı Dağ, and it's the mountain of pain.
These hazards, though, do not put off the most determined explorers. If anything, they enhance its appeal.
The climbers come from everywhere in the world, and they come for different reasons. Some people are just mountain climbers, and they go around the world climbing the high summits. Mount Ararat is 5,137 meters, so it's a high mountain. Other people come because they're searching for Noah's Ark.
But few were as serious and committed as Jim Irwin. He needed to be. His task was huge. The mountain isn't just 25 miles wide. It is spread out over some 380 square miles. The Ark could be anywhere. Fortunately, there were some clues. People had been there before. 2,000 years ago, the Jewish historian Josephus described how local farmers would show remains of the Ark to those who are curious to see them. The 7th century Spanish saint Isidore of Seville claimed that on Mount Ararat, wood remains are to be seen even to this day. And the 14th century Venetian traveller Marco Polo passed by Ararat, calling it the Mountain of Noah's Ark. And if these reports were old and vague, there was more recent evidence. In the 1950s, the French Christian explorer Fernand Navarra spotted some timbers jutting out of a precipice. He managed to extract one and bring it down from the mountain despite suffering severe altitude sickness. But when the timber was tested, the results were inconclusive. Some tests put it at the time the Bible says the Great Flood happened, but carbon dating indicated it was much younger, probably from the 6th century AD. Still, Navarra was just one of some 200 people in the last 2 centuries who claimed to have seen the remains of the Ark. Many were local farmers who would graze their animals on the mountain in the summer months. Most of these sightings were of an Ark-like object situated between 13,000 and 16,000 feet on the north of the mountain. So this is where Jim Irwin chose to look. In the summer of 1982, he set out up the slope of Mount Ararat with a small team, including his son-in-law, John Christensen.
That first morning, we were in a base camp in a smooth plain. And we woke up and there was a rainstorm. And there was a rainbow that came right into camp. And we were like, oh man, this is going to be good, because right after the flood of Noah was the first rainbow, and we thought, this is a sign, and it's going to be good.
Jim Irwin was back in his element.
I remember him talking to a shepherd on the mountain. This man had spent his whole life as a shepherd, and now he's old and weathered. And he meets Jim, and Jim is explaining to him through the interpreter, yes, I've been on the moon. And the way he treated that man, that shepherd, was with such tenderness and compassion.
Over the next few days, hope started to fade. Every crevasse, gully and glacier which might be hiding the remnants of an ancient boat was explored, but that rainbow never reappeared.
It was a lot tougher than we thought it was because it's such a volcanic area, and the mountain is a lot of loose rocks, so it was really almost like 3 steps up, 1 step back. It was a hike getting up there, and it was really difficult to get your footing. You really had to concentrate on almost every step because it was all loose rock.
And they found nothing. No shape of a hidden ark, no beam of wood, not even a plank of petrified timber. Jim Irwin was completely dispirited. Worse was to follow.
He says, I'm going back to base camp, and he unfortunately broke his own rule of never hiking alone. And so he went down, and we were in communication with base camp, and they said he had never returned. And it was dusk.
The team were deeply worried. Mount Ararat was not a place to spend the night on your own.
We started out from on top, coming down as far as we could to look for him. But then it just got too dark and dangerous, so we retreated. And we waited until the next morning.
They dreaded what they might find.
At first light, we found him down at the end of a rock field. He was unrecognizable because he had been covered with blood and hit by rocks from a rock slide. He was cut from head to toe from all the rocks.
There was no medical equipment on hand. Nobody was quite sure what to do.
They just took alcohol and poured it in all the open wounds. And when we first did it, the only sound he made was and then they shipped him from there to a hospital in Erzurum.
It was touch and go.
He had lost a lot of blood, and he was very fortunate to survive.
It was a miserable experience for a man who had gone all the way to the moon. But it did not deter him from going back several more times, always to return empty-handed.
There had been people telling him that, you know, you're going to find Noah's Ark and it's going to happen, and we all thought if there was going to be somebody who finds it, it's going to be Jim.
Good liftoff, automatic.
It was, in fact, the great disappointment of his life. The man who journeyed into space had failed on his other great journey on Earth. Jim Irwin died in 1991 of heart failure. He was only 61 years old.
I miss him a lot, a lot. To get him to laugh, it was like gold. And so I miss his laughter. I miss his heart and his compassion.
Shortly before he passed away, he said he had done all I possibly can, but the Ark continues to elude us. It was easier to walk on the moon.
I think because of his experience on the moon, that he felt the Lord had given him a platform for speaking about who Jesus was. So I think being a part of finding something biblical that was his heart's desire, I think that would have in the end given him more fulfillment. I do.
But Jim Irwin's failure to find the Ark did nothing to dampen down speculation. Instead, it encouraged a new generation of Christian explorers to succeed where he had drawn a blank. Deep in suburban America, searching for the Ark became fashionable, the kind of adventure any young creationist might aspire to. One who quickly became obsessed was David Fasold.
For over a year, I haven't dreamed about anything else, from the time I put my head on the pillow to the time I wake up. And that's all I think about all day long.
He grew up after the war, a time of progress and prosperity. On every street corner, there was a church. He joined the Marines and then set up a salvage company where hunting for sunken ships gave him the exploring bug. And what better boat to explore than Noah's Ark? Fasold knew the story by heart. He'd been brought up as a member of the Plymouth Brethren, an evangelical strand of Christianity known for its strict adherence to the Bible. Now he read his scriptures and pored over other ancient texts late into the night. He reached an interesting conclusion. There was nothing in Genesis that said the boat had to be on Mount Ararat itself. It could be anywhere in the area.
One of the problems we have is that all of these expeditions are of Mount Ararat. The Bible does not say Mount Ararat. The Bible says the mountains of Ararat. And that is probably a very different place.
With his knowledge of boats, Fasold thought it much more likely the Ark would have ended up further down, and that's when he discovered Durupinar. In 1959, a Turkish pilot was flying over Mount Ararat on a government mapping mission when he noticed a strange mound 17 miles south. It was shaped like a boat, and its dimensions were similar to the description of the Ark in the Bible. Its height was exactly the same. As soon as David Fasold saw it, he was sure it was a shipwreck. And he was convinced he would be the person to prove it. But there was one thing he had not taken into account. Mount Ararat has always been a lawless part of the world. A buffer between Turkey, Armenia, and Iran. Most of the people who live here are Kurds. They resent being part of Turkey.
By citizenship, they are Turkish, and their ID says they're Turkish, but they are Kurdish by their heritage and their cultural identity. They speak a different language, actually, here.
So Duha Bayazit, the nearest town to Mount Ararat, and the base for any expedition to find the Ark, is a strange and uneasy place. It is full of Iranian smugglers, Turkish police, and Kurdish rebels who are terrorists to some, freedom fighters to others. In 1984, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, began a military campaign which would claim over 40,000 lives.
The landscape may look like biblical times, but it's racked by present-day problems. The Turkish government has turned the entire eastern province, NATO's first line of defense, into a vast armed camp under martial law. Exotic it is, but it's also tense.
To draw attention to their struggle, the PKK targeted tourists. They did not have far to look. Colonel Jim Irwin had helped make Duha Bayazit a magnet for a new group of Christian Ark searchers.
Well, there have been people that have been killed over the years. We had one Turkish man working for us that was shot. There have been a lot of people that have been hurt physically and financially. But we've got a job to do, and whatever the cost.
It was into this cauldron that David Fasold wandered, an innocent abroad. He knew little about Kurdistan. Few Americans did. Apart, that is, from one man who was already making a name for himself. Ron Wyatt, an ex-nurse from Kalamazoo, Michigan, had reinvented himself as a Christian explorer. He seemed to know everyone in town.
Ron talked about the Garden of God and the things that he's searching for. He wanted to search and find everything out there.
Wyatt had long been convinced that the place to look for the Ark was not Mount Ararat itself, but on the mound of Darupanar.
It shows that the vessel came right through here.
David Fashold had found a kindred soul, and he had something that Ron Wyatt hadn't, an engineer's mind. They teamed up and decided to do the kind of exhaustive exploration that would finally win over the skeptics.
Have you ever seen anything like this? Look at the grain in this thing. It almost looks like wood.
Fashold took the lead. Any boat of the time, he argued, would have needed iron rivets to hold it together and stay afloat. So all you needed to prove that the remnants of the Ark were buried underneath was to scan the earth for iron.
All right, now I'm going to skip this one.
This would show, at the very least, that there was an ancient boat there. And what boat could it be but the Ark? With cameras watching and an impressive-looking machine that some said was a molecular frequency generator, but others claimed it was just a glorified metal detector, Fashold started searching. Soon he got a result. His machine picked up a pattern of iron with a shape 450 feet long, exactly the 300 Egyptian cubits laid down in the Bible. Could this really be the Ark? David Fashold and Ron Wyatt were absolutely sure it was, as their local guide of the time remembers.
It's definitely now been decided that Noah's Ark is here. They bought a sheep from the village and they made offerings in accordance to their own religion. After their prayers were over, they said, "Let's pray according to Islam and kill this as a sacrifice." They cut that sheep up and gave it to the people, piece by piece.
That was enough to convince the locals, but Fashold and Wyatt knew the rest of the world would want a little more. In a village field at the bottom of Mount Ararat, they had discovered several anchor stones, which they now argued would have stabilized the Ark in rough seas, as had been predicted in holy texts.
Same kind of strange stone. When the early Christians found these things, they carved 8 crosses on it for the 8 survivors. This whole valley was known as the region of 8.
This was a clear sign, they said, that previous generations had regarded them as sacred. According to the Bible, there were 8 people on the Ark. Was this too much of a coincidence? It was certainly good enough for the Turks, who saw a marketing opportunity. They proclaimed Darupanar a national park and opened a visitors center. The Kurds saw an opportunity too. The PKK kidnapped Wyatt and 4 other members of the team. They were held for 3 weeks.
Ron Wyatt came home 20 pounds lighter and walking with a slight limp, but in otherwise good health despite being held hostage for 3 weeks.
When they were released unharmed, it was a major news event.
They couldn't speak our language, but we got the message right quick. They made us put our hands up, and then they took us off up through the hills.
Wyatt says he and his companions were lined up for execution.
They would have killed us.
Wyatt appeared in good health and good spirits, and he says he's convinced now more than ever he has discovered Noah's Ark.
Christian America treated them as heroes. Fashold and Wyatt's discoveries led to fame, TV specials, and best-selling books. But while Wyatt enjoyed his celebrity by waltzing around the biblical world, Fashold stayed on in Dohu Bayazid, determined to make a full exploration. He expected his fellow Ark searchers to be overjoyed the Ark had been discovered at last. Instead, they were dismissive.
Well, I didn't agree with their conclusions. I was with them in '85 when they were there, and they looked at this site, and I walked all over it. I think what it is, it's simply a mud flow around a rhyolitic formation that kind of formed, looks like a sailing ship actually. And the Ark wasn't a sailing ship, it was a box.
And that was exactly the conclusion of the scientists who had flocked there to determine what really was underneath this strange ark-like shape whose pictures had gone round the world. David Fasold claimed that his machines had found traces of iron underneath the mound.
That looks like iron, okay?
But that meant if there was something there, it couldn't be the Ark. Noah lived before the Iron Age.
Iron didn't exist. It wasn't used back then. Noah would have never used iron. The way you're building boats right up till 2000 BC and even later is with mortise and tenon, with wooden joints and pegs. You're not going to find iron. And so, indeed, most of Ron Wyatt's and David Fasold's claims have been repudiated.
This ark turned out to be an entirely natural formation, only noticed because it was near to Mount Ararat. Even the anchor stones were not unusual, but found all over this ancient land. And those 8 crosses weren't Christian, but pagan. The Turks were not pleased at all. They had spent a lot of money on their visitor center. Their signs said it was the site of Noah's Ark, and that's what it remains, even today.
Noah's Ark National Park. It's a lovely walk for about an hour, hour and a half. We have a picnic lunch there. The rock goes straight up like it forms a boat. It's a very interesting rock formation. I ask everyone, what do you think, Noah's Ark? They said no, interesting rock formation.
With evident sadness, David Fasold changed his mind. Darupinar was not the site of Noah's Ark. It never was. For many years, he had believed it was much more. And when his belief faltered, he never really recovered. He died a few years later at the age of 59 of cancer, possibly brought about by those long days in the Turkish sun. Even more than Jim Irwin, the search for Noah's Ark had taken its toll. When he died, he was penniless. He'd spent all his money looking for the ancient boat. Shortly before his death, he said that intellectual brilliance is no guarantee for being wrong. But one Christian Ark hunter has no intention of being wrong. Richard Bright has given his life to searching for the Ark. He was brought up in Minnesota as a Christian, but for the first 20 years of his life, his faith had not meant a great deal. But in 1966, he had an experience which changed his life. He served in Vietnam. Under enemy fire, he directly connected to God.
I was in a certain place, and a little voice told me to move. And I told my buddy next to me, I says, "Did you say something?" He said, "No." And the voice come to me again, a little stronger, "Move." I said, "What'd you say?" "Nothing. Be quiet." The third time, I said, "We're out of here." He said, "Okay." Well, we just jumped in the vehicle, and I hadn't driven 100 feet, and the first mortar round blew the wall apart where I had been leaning against.
Bright is convinced that voice came from God and saved his life. In the 1980s, he met another person whose life had been changed by God, Jim Irwin.
And Jim took me up the hill just a couple of times, and I met him there in '86, and that's for the third trip.
We're only a day late.
It planted a seed somewhere along the line, and that's kind of been growing.
That seed has been growing ever since. Like Irwin, he was, and is, absolutely convinced that the Ark was somewhere on Mount Ararat proper. Darupanar was a red herring. And when Owen died, Richard Bright carried on trying to find the Ark on the mountain, while continuing with his day job as a pilot for Continental Airlines.
I do think the structure exists. I'm positive of that. I've put my life on the line here many, many times, and so have a lot of other people. Good, solid, very sharp researchers. And not only just because we're Bible-believing Christians, and we are, but because the research tells you that there's something up there we should pay attention to.
He is even clear what it might look like.
I don't know if it's got SS Noah stamped on the side, but it's a huge barge-like structure, and it floated up there just high up. It's got a bunch of little rooms inside, and it's very, very old.
Bright has now gone up the mountain over 20 times in the last 30 years and faced many hazards. He is sure it is only God that has kept him alive.
At one point, I remember the rocks, big rocks falling toward me, and I had no place to go. And so I kind of dove behind a little small rock that was about shoulder high. And the rocks are falling all around me, big boulders. And then I looked up, and I saw the biggest boulder I'd ever seen coming right at me, right here. So I says, Jesus, I need you now, right now, Jesus. Angels' wings, I need you now. Something to that effect. Well, this little rock I was hiding behind was just barely above my shoulders, and this monster landed on top of the rock and skimmed over the top of me. Missed me by less than a foot. And had that rock not been there, I'd be big body parts all over the place.
For other Ark explorers, that might have been enough. But Richard Bright just redoubled his efforts, chasing up every possible lead to where the Ark might be. There was no use. Every time he came down empty-handed. He was beginning to think his quest, like Jim Irwin's, would always be fruitless. But then came hope. The American government released a photo taken by one of their spy planes, which had been kept secret for decades. It showed an unidentified shape high up on the northern slope of Mount Ararat in exactly the same place as many of the most credible sightings had been. Was this the Ark? And then in 2003 came something else. New satellite photos did indeed pinpoint something unnatural that looked a lot like the prow of a boat. It seemed a sign that Bright's long search might finally be coming to an end. And then he met a witness. A Kurdish shepherd told Bright in convincing detail how he had seen the Ark high up on the mountain when he was a child.
There was a shepherd man that took me up to this place. He claimed that 40-some years prior, he had seen this thing coming up out of the canyon, out of the ice.
It was a long climb back up the slope. Eventually, they reached the glacial plateau, where the shepherd claimed he had seen the ancient boat. Nervously, they ventured forward. Could this really be the Ark? Their hearts sank when they realized the place where the Ark was said to be was now covered by a collection of boulders.
We went up there ultimately and dug a big hole, but we didn't find anything. But the shepherd had dug it with us. He wanted to let us know he was telling the truth, and we don't think the man was lying to us.
Bright believed him and started putting together a team that could uncover the Ark once and for all. But he then realized he had a rival. This team were creationists too, but they were not from the American suburbs, but from Hong Kong, a city known more for its pragmatic commitment to making money than for any biblical belief. They called themselves Noah's Ark Ministries International, and in 2007 they announced a great success. They had found a piece of ancient petrified wood, which they had dated as 4,800 years old. But others were not so sure.
Some of the recent claims by expeditions that have gone there, both the Chinese recently or other expeditions in the last 5 years, have made claims for petrified wood and other things where it's not wood at all, it's stone. And if they had had a geologist with them, he could have told them right then and there, no, don't waste your time, that's just an outcrop of stone.
The Chinese were adamant their specimen was wood and pointed to scientific analysis as proof. Some of Richard Bright's colleagues did join forces with them for a while, but the collaboration didn't last long. Like many climbing arrangements, what sounds good over a cup of mint tea tends to evaporate 15,000 feet up a freezing cold mountain. The Chinese team went back to working on their own with the help of some sympathetic Turks. Soon they claimed an amazing find. Down a gully underneath a glacier, they found the Ark. And they even filmed it.
My initial reaction when I heard the news of the Chinese expedition that had found Noah's Ark was, oh boy, here we go again.
The Chinese video showed their team deep inside a crack in the mountain. Packed within ice walls was a wooden structure consistent in size with that described in the Bible. Jutting up from the cave floor was a wooden beam and a structure containing several wooden compartments.
Yeah.
Back in Hong Kong, the Chinese announced their finding to the world at a press conference. They were 99.9% certain this was the Ark.
The media onslaught was amazing for this. I mean, all of a sudden my phone starts ringing and I've got people calling and Fox News wants to see my opinion and Good Morning America, and it was well beyond the usual. And that was because these people actually had photographic evidence, or so they said.
Suspicions grew when the Chinese would not say where the site actually was. So, making use of the close contacts she had with the families of the Kurdish guides who control the mountain, Amy Bean went to look for herself.
They told everyone that it was a secret place to preserve the archaeological site. They wouldn't let anyone know. So at Camp 2, I just went up there and I filmed it.
She found nothing, nor did anyone else. And skepticism about the Chinese discovery turned to disbelief.
I would say 100% I do not believe it. It was too good to be true. That's the way I would phrase it. It was just too good to be true. We've never seen anything really published since. No scientific article, no backing up of the claims. And then there are fights between the people who took them up Mount Ararat and the ones who didn't. And it just expands. And all of a sudden, you're in this morass of a soap opera, which, you know, if you found Noah's Ark and it's real, it doesn't deserve that.
The Chinese missionaries stand by their discovery and promise all will be revealed soon. If their find does turn out not to be Noah's Ark, it won't be the first time. Many of the Christians who have come to find the Ark in the past have had plenty of money. The Kurdish guides who help them look are poor.
We're sitting in Topchana village, and the guide families live here. The men in the families have to support fairly large families, mother, father, sisters, wife, and children. Sometimes 5 or 10 people one guide is supporting. It's hard for them to turn down work. This is their livelihood. And the Ark searchers are coming and coming and coming. And they have money, 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 5,000, 10,000, 50,000. So it's such a temptation.
It is summer in the valley. The snow line has receded on the great mountain of Ararat. Everyone is looking forward to the short tourist season. Soon the climbers will arrive. The Chinese are coming back again, determined to show the world that they really have found the Ark. Other creationist teams are here too, including veteran Noah's Ark explorer Richard Bright, this time with his dream team.
The best on the planet as far as I'm concerned. We've got some wonderful people. These people that know how to climb and get things done. We've got scientists on board this team.
And one of those experts is his real calling card. After many years seeking the Ark alone, he now has the help of a real American star. Randall Price is a distinguished professor of Judaic studies at Liberty University in Virginia. He has a track record of excavating biblical sites, most notably the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran in Israel. With Professor Price on board, Bright is convinced that the Ark will soon be found.
I'm of the opinion that, yes, it will be revealed this year. If I didn't believe that, why would I even go, right? Like I said, I'd rather be on the beach.
It is this conviction that keeps driving these Christian Ark searchers on. Despite all the pain and all the cost, their faith tells them that the remains of Noah's Ark will be found up this inhospitable mountain many thousands of miles away from home. The religious sincerity of Ark searchers like Jim Irwin, David Fassold, and Richard Bright is not in doubt, even to those who do not share their beliefs.
Richard Bright is truly searching for something he believes very deeply in. If there's something there, I believe he will find it. When I first met Richard, when he was still trying to convert me, he would always say, "Amy, please open your heart to Jesus. I'm trying to save you before it's too late." But I did say, "Richard, if you find Noah's Ark on that mountain, I'll be a believer."
We don't care who finds it. We don't care what mountain it's on. We just want it found because we believe that it does, in fact, still exist. We're almost there. We're almost there.
In 1944, in the ruins of wartime Italy, elite German troops are on a special mission.
We saw people beaten up, killed. They just shot them.
They have been sent by Heinrich Himmler, the head of the Nazis' murderous SS, to seize a precious treasure before Italy falls into Allied hands. They're searching for what has been called the Bible for the Aryan race, a book which will justify the most horrific policies of Nazi Germany.
It gives an academic justification to the idea of a difference between peoples.
This is what our ancestors used to be like, pure and unlike any other people.
Once you create the idea that some races are inferior, then you've got a legitimacy to start murdering people, by the race load.
The book is so important that Himmler will stop at nothing to get it. This is the true story of the Nazi quest for the Book of Power. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler took office as the Chancellor of Germany. But his hold on power was not as secure as it seemed. The Nazis had won less than half the popular vote. The nation was divided, and he needed to unite it.
You've got, in the middle of the 20th century, a country that only really exists as a concept because it was, until just a few years before, in real terms, just a collection of very, very small states. How do you unite these people? Well, the way to unite them is to create a mythology.
The myth that the Nazis hoped could unite the German people was the idea that they were descended from a race superior to all others, the Aryans. The Nazis claimed that the Aryans had originated from Atlantis, the mythical city first described by Plato as the birthplace of all civilization. They claimed that in prehistoric times, these Aryans had settled on the North German plains. They were said to be a race of tall, flaxen-haired warriors who uniquely possessed the genius to create civilization. Hitler believed that the German people were descended directly from these superhumans.
There is this need in the Nazis to demonstrate that they were a kind of cradle of civilization, that they'd been there for a long, long time.
The Nazis claimed that before the ancient Greeks and Romans were ruling the Mediterranean, the ancestors of the Germans had already spawned a great northern European civilization.
There does seem to be a tendency to want to endorse your current position in the world by taking your history as far back as it can go to show that you got there first. Perhaps you're more advanced, perhaps you're more legitimate to be in this role.
This Aryan myth was the one the Nazis believed could rally the German people to their banner.
Everything has to tie back to promote the idea that the Germans are the best, quote, race in the world.
But the fly in the ointment was that there was no proof that this master race had ever existed. But an ancient manuscript was said to exist which supported the Nazis' ideas. It told of a people who lived in Germany thousands of years before, and the Nazis believed that this book would prove all their theories to be true. It was called the Germania and was written in Rome nearly 2,000 years before. In the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire was reaching its height, stretching from Africa and the Mediterranean to the lands of the Britons. But the Germania told of a group of people in the north of mainland Europe who even the Romans could not quell. A people called the Germanen. In 9 AD, one of Rome's most famous generals, Quintilius Varus, led an army of 3 legions to conquer the Germanen. Under their fierce warrior king, Hermann, the Germanen tribes came face to face with the Romans in the Teutoburg forests. There, they dealt the mighty empire a devastating blow. All 3 Roman legions were wiped out.
Germany for the Romans was a very emotive place, precisely because of this disaster in AD 9, where this general Quintilius Varus lost these 3 legions.
So great was the disaster, the Roman Emperor Augustus conceded that the Germanen were just too ferocious to be quelled.
Augustus decided that Germany should not be pushed further as a conquest. And that was a very powerful message to send out to subsequent emperors. It's daunting, it's forbidding.
The Nazis claimed that the modern Germans were the direct descendants of King Hermann's fearsome warriors. They also believed that the book, the Germania, held written proof of the superiority of their ancestors. The fabled Germania was written not by a German, but by the Roman senator and orator Cornelius Tacitus around the year 98 AD.
He was one of the most accomplished speakers of his generation, and he had an exemplary political career. He even became a consul and became what many people believe is the greatest Roman historian.
Tacitus wrote at the time of the most decadent period in Roman history. His works describe every sordid detail of the reigns of Rome's leaders, the Emperor Tiberius, Claudius, and Nero. But for the Germanen, Tacitus was apparently full of praise.
He says that no other nation, no other group of people had troubled the Romans so much as the Germans with their strong sense of liberty.
In the book, The Germania, Tacitus describes in admiring detail the culture of the Germanen tribes, the gods they worship, how they select their kings, what weapons they use in battle, and their custom of fiercely training their youth as warriors.
Their characteristics are very much, I think, put on a pedestal as qualities that Romans actually admire. For example, their chastity and their simplicity in terms of not being interested in money, in profit, and that sort of thing.
No one in Germany laughs at vice, nor do they call it the fashion to corrupt and to be corrupted. They choose their kings by birth, their generals by merit. No nation indulges more profusely in entertainments and hospitality.
Tacitus's descriptions appeared to match the image of their ancestors that the Nazis were keen to promote to the German people.
You're presented with idealised native types who have a certain kind of purity about them and go about things in a very different way from Romans.
There's this whole tradition of reading the Germania as if it were a glorification of the noble savage.
More than that, Tacitus describes the physical characteristics of these mighty Germans. He wrote about how they had fierce blue eyes, blonde hair, and huge frames. In short, they were perfect Aryans. For the Nazis, the Germania was proof that the German people were descended from a mighty race superior to all others, and provided a direct link to their Aryan origins. And the words of Tacitus would resonate with one German in particular. In 1924, a young failed chicken farmer called Heinrich Himmler read the Germania on a long train journey and would be inspired by the words of Tacitus.
There he found, written by a Roman historian 2,000 years before, many of the things that he already believed in, so he basically found them confirmed.
After reading the Germania, the young Himmler confided to his diary,
I was lost in the glorious image of the loftiness, purity, and nobleness of our ancestors.
He wrote down in his diary that he hoped that the Germans would be so again, so it had a huge impact on him.
Himmler would go on to become one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany.
Throughout the 1930s, Himmler becomes a very, very key figure in the Third Reich. He's a very underrated figure because he's quiet and unassuming. He looks quite bookish with his little glasses and his short hair, and he's a former chicken farmer, and obviously that's quite funny. But actually, don't underestimate Heinrich Himmler. This is a man, throughout the whole arc of the Nazi regime, is a man who grabs power little by little.
Himmler rose to be head of the SS, a fearsome paramilitary organization which controlled much of the Nazi state. and Himmler would shape his SS in the image of the warrior race described in the Germania.
One could in many ways say that what he promised himself in his diary in 1924, he would then try to live up to as the leader of the SS. He himself conceived of the SS as the vanguard of the future Germanic Empire.
But more than that, Himmler believed the words of Tacitus didn't just have lessons for the SS, but for all true Germans.
The Germania by Tacitus is referred to as a Bible that every thinking German should possess, because people should aspire to be as morally elevated, straightforward, honorable, direct, and brave as their Germanic ancestors allegedly had been.
Himmler wanted the Nazi state to be a reflection of the ancient German society described by Tacitus. Just as in the Germania, children were taught to swear loyalty to their leader, in this case, Adolf Hitler.
The chief fights for victory. His vassals fight for their chief.
Students were taught to be like their warrior forefathers, even wrestling and exercising with weapons.
Naked youths dance amid swords and lances that threaten their lives. Experience gives them skill, and skill again gives grace.
The Honor Cross was awarded to women who bore many children, as this was something much admired in Germanic society.
The offspring reproduced the strength of the parents.
And in the policy of Lebensraum, German people were told that the lands of neighboring countries, which had once been the home of ancient Germanic tribes, were rightfully theirs. But beyond even that, Himmler would use Tacitus to justify the most evil of all Nazi policies. In 1935, the Nazis implemented the first of many racial laws. Called the Law for the Protection of German Blood and Honor, it was an ominous first step in the Nazis' anti-Jewish policies.
It prohibits marriages between Aryan Germans and Jewish Germans.
And it was based on one paragraph of the Germania.
Key line in Germania is when Tacitus writes that the Germans are a people unto themselves, the implication being that there's no breeding with any other race or with any other people. They're a homogeneous group of people.
Tacitus said they hadn't mixed with other people. So not only were they indigenous, but they were pure and unlike any other people.
The Nazis were using the words of Tacitus to justify policies which would unleash an unimaginable terror on the world.
It gives an academic justification to the idea of a difference between peoples. And once you create the idea that some races are inferior, you then create the idea that some lives are worth less than others. And once you create that idea, then you've got a legitimacy to start murdering people, by the race load.
In other words, there is a direct link between their interpretation of the Germania and the Nazi death camps. Because of their understanding of Tacitus, over 11 million people would be murdered in the Nazi genocide.
That's how disastrously influential that particular paragraph was.
So important was this book to Nazi ideology that Himmler desperately wanted the authentic text. The trouble was that no one knew what had happened to Tacitus's original manuscript. So to find it, Himmler turned to one of the strangest and most sinister branches of the SS. It was known as the Ahnenerbe and had been created by Himmler in 1935. Unlike the Germanic warriors who made up the rest of the SS, the Ahnenerbe was an institution made up of academics.
If you want the classic example of how the Nazis manipulated intellectualism and academic behaviour, you can go no further than look at the Ahnenerbe. This was an institution set up ultimately by Himmler to research, quote-unquote, German ancestry. And it was to look at how you could construct a mythology of Aryanism and Germanic culture.
The Ahnenerbe were charged with rewriting history to help Himmler to prove that the Aryan Germanic people were superior to all other races.
The Studienstiftung Ahnenerbe. There were genuine intellectuals and researchers and scientists working side by side with real cranks.
And there were around 100 academics of various different sorts working there. You had a support staff of about the same size. So you've got about 200 people. And the Ahnenerbe can't just be seen as a kind of harmless bunch of corrupted academics who were just sucking up to the Nazis. Because what they were proving was helping to create a worldview that was in essence evil.
On Himmler's orders, the Ahnenerbe began to search for Tacitus's lost manuscript. Immediately, they encountered a problem. Tacitus's original no longer existed. In the collapse of the Roman Empire and the ensuing centuries of the Dark Ages, many precious documents were lost. But a glimmer of hope remained. The Ahnenerbe discovered that the manuscript had escaped the fires of Rome. And at some point in history, a single perfect copy of the original text had been made. But this too was missing.
Well, the survival of classical texts is often a very, very random and hazardous business. The fact that we can read the Germania today dates back to the fact that there was this one manuscript which was copied.
It was said that a travelling Italian scholar had made this beautiful word-for-word copy of the Germania in a monastery in southern Germany in the mid-15th century. This copy of the Germania became known as the Assinas Codex.
And that's the copy that Heinrich Himmler was trying to get his hands on. Because it's as close as you can get to the written account of the Germanic past.
The Ahnenerbe immediately began hunting down the Assinas Codex. They scoured the world in their search. And eventually they brought some good news to Himmler. In 1936, they reported that the book he so desperately wanted had been found. The Assinas Codex had been traced to the east of Italy. For 200 years it had lain in obscurity in the vast private library of an Italian count, the Count Aurelio Baldeschi Baliani.
My father was Conte Aurelio Baldeschi Guglielmi Baleani. In Italy, it's a very important title.
My father had 3 houses. One is this villa where we are now. The other one is a palace in Osimo. And the other is the palace in Iesi.
The Codex Aeschines was stored in the library that they had in the Palazzo in Iesi. People had simply forgotten about it.
The Count's libraries contained many other important documents, such as the letters of Casanova and writings by Cicero.
So it's fairly easy to see how it would get overlooked.
As a result, Count Aurelio Baldeschi Baleani was completely unaware of how important the Aeschines Codex was to the Nazis.
Tacitus or Resino's Codex was the most important book to Germany. We really never realized it was such an important thing.
It was in this library of the family, and it was not really, nobody knew how important it was.
But soon that would change.
Prima di tutto l'agricoltura, che deve trovare sbocchi per i prodotti ubertosi delle vostre terre.
In 1936, Italy was ruled over by Benito Mussolini. Like Hitler, he was another fascist leader. This brutal, populist politician had seized control of Italy in a coup d'etat in 1922 and declared himself Il Duce, the leader. And since coming to power, Hitler, the German Führer, had been carefully courting his Italian counterpart. Now, on Himmler's request, Hitler petitioned the Italian dictator to obtain the manuscript and present it to the Nazi state. It seemed that Mussolini was more than happy to oblige.
Mussolini thought, well, if Hitler wants this book very badly, it's a good idea to give it to him, to try and take it from the family.
Himmler was convinced that it was only a matter of time before he would have it in his grasp. He planned a triumphant return for the Germania at the 1936 Nazi Party convention, where hundreds of thousands of party members would be in attendance. An enormous Germanic room was built with huge panels featuring quotes from Tacitus, and above the door was a quotation from Hitler himself.
German youth shall know, manly loyalty was the virtue of the old Germanen. The new state is erected upon that virtue.
But Himmler hadn't reckoned on the stubbornness of the Count Baldeschi Baleani. An emissary from Mussolini's government was sent to meet the Count at his villa to request him to give up the Aeschines Codex. But the Count Aurelio Baldeschi Baleani was not used to being bossed around.
Mussolini wanted to give it to Hitler as a present, but my father actually didn't like fascism. He didn't like Mussolini.
The Count thought Mussolini was ridiculous, and he had no time for the pompous upstart's demands. So he refused to hand over the book.
He didn't want to make Mussolini too happy. He didn't want to make Hitler happy. I mean, he didn't want to give it away.
I was always proud of my father for everything. Just to say no and just to be very nonchalant about it. I think that demonstrates courage and intelligence.
Himmler was infuriated by Mussolini's failure. To make matters worse, his best hope of getting the book, Hitler, was losing interest in Himmler's obsessions.
Adolf Hitler had, in private conversations on more than one occasion, only snide comments to make. He couldn't quite see what these scholar types, so fascinated with the Germanic past, actually had to contribute to the rise of, the German state.
Himmler liked surrounding himself with all this mythology, whereas Hitler thought this was going all a little bit too far. He saw it as being unnecessary. To him, it was about politics and power.
But Himmler refused to give up. He continued to put pressure on the Baleski-Balianis, sending his own emissaries to meet with the Count.
The interest in the book was very, very, very strong, and so they made several attempts to try and take this book from us.
Finally, after 2 years of mounting pressure, Count Aurelio made a concession. The Germans couldn't have the book, but they could at least have a look at it. Just before the outbreak of the war, the Count packed up the book and sent it to Rome, where it would be photographed for Himmler. In Rome, it was presented to Himmler's emissary.
A member of the Ahnenerbe, Rudolf Till, was given access to the Codex Aesinas in Italy, and he was able to produce a set of photographs.
The Ahnenerbe used these photographs to produce a Nazi edition of the Aesinas Codex. Himmler even wrote the foreword himself.
The future will only be granted to those who understand the stock of their ancestry.
But for Himmler, even this was not enough. All he had was a facsimile. He was determined to possess the original. And one day, he would have the chance to take it. In 1939, Hitler plunged the world into war. Under Mussolini, Italy was Germany's most important ally. The two dictators eventually found themselves fighting both the Western powers and Russia. After 4 bloody years, the tide of the war turned against the fascist nations. In 1943, Allied forces landed in the south of Italy. Benito Mussolini was overthrown by an Italian revolt, and Italy switched its allegiance to the Allies. To shore up his southern flank, Hitler was forced to send German troops into Italy. Himmler now saw an opportunity to seize the Aesinas Codex from the Baldeschi-Baliani family. So with the German advance, Himmler now sent an entire unit of his own SS troops to the region, with the express purpose of tracking the book down. But where was it? The Baldeschi-Balianis had 3 properties, 2 town palazzi and a country villa. The book could be in any one of them, or none of them. First, Himmler's soldiers were sent to the Baliani's main residence, his villa outside the town of Jesi.
After Mussolini was dead, at the end, the Germans came looking themselves for the book.
But they found the villa empty. Days before, the Count had moved his family out of the villa to one of his other properties to protect them. But Himmler's troops did discover one thing. The Count's servants had taken everything of value from the villa to another of his properties, his palazzo in the town of Jesi, only a few miles away. The Count's treasures had been smuggled out in agricultural carts, hidden from the Germans beneath piles of farm produce.
There were many cars that were going at that time in the center of the town of Jesi, so lots of things were hidden under the wheat and under the grapes.
Could it be that the Asinus Codex was among the valuables? So now Himmler's troops rushed to the palazzo in Jesi.
They asked for the book in a very aggressive way. And also here, the waiters and the chauffeurs and all the people working in the house, maybe pretending they didn't understand the language, maybe risking also their life, because I mean, at those times, life was not so safe like it can be today in this kind of situation.
But once again, Himmler's troops found nothing. Neither the Germania nor the Baldeschi family were in the villa at Jesi. Himmler's SS now turned their attentions to the third of the Count's properties, another palazzo 30 kilometers away in the town of Osimo.
My family, they all moved to Osimo. They moved there because they were thinking that it was more safe.
From their hiding place in Osimo, the Baldeschi-Balianis witnessed the horrors of life under the Germans.
My brother and I used to look from the window and were really petrified because we saw people beaten up, killed. They just shot them. And so that was really a very, very horrible thing to see. And my parents didn't know we were seeing it, but I mean, children, you know, they climb up on a window and look down.
Eventually, Himmler's soldiers arrived at the palazzo itself.
It was all locked, the house.
They knocked at the door.
They were knocking at the door. I remember this very vividly, and I remember how scared we were that they could break down the door and take my father and kill him.
As the Germans searched the palazzo, the family hid in the cellars below.
I was 10 years old. My brother, one was 9, the other was even less. It was a terrible experience. We spent 18 days down in the cellars without ever coming up.
Himmler's soldiers scoured the house. But they never found the cellar door, and the Baldeschi-Baliani family remained safe. So did the book. May the 8th, 1945 brought an end to 6 years of war in Europe. The Nazi dream of a 1,000-year Reich based on the foundations of an ancient Germanic culture had come to nothing. Hitler had shot himself in his Berlin bunker. And Heinrich Himmler swallowed a cyanide capsule whilst in British custody.
This is the house in Lüneburg where Himmler committed suicide. In that room, the most despicable of all German criminals contrived to take poison.
With the war over, the truth about the elusive Asinus Codex would begin to emerge. Did this book really justify the Nazis' murderous policies? And anyway, where was it? One mystery was easily solved. The book had never moved from the first place that Himmler's troops had gone searching for it. The Baldeschi-Baliani's villa outside Jesi had a secret room.
This room has a false window. From the outside you see it, but in fact it's not a window that you can open.
The room with the false window had a hidden door, concealed by a wardrobe.
The door that was already a safety door by itself was also protected by furniture.
So then you could even see the door.
Behind the wardrobe and the hidden door sat a simple chest.
Inside this room there is this cassaforte, we say in Italian. Usually you keep laundry inside.
Concealed inside a pile of laundry lay the thing that had so obsessed Himmler. Tacitus's Germania. With the threat of the Nazis gone, the Baldeschi-Balianis no longer had to hide the book. The Italian government now recognized it as a national treasure, and the Baldeschi-Balianis would display it with pride in their library in Jesi for the next 20 years.
Every year, the Italian government sent some inspectors to see if the book was still with us, if it was well kept.
One year, the inspectors asked the Count to bring the book to Florence, as they couldn't make it to Jesi.
In 1966, they were in Florence, these inspectors, and they said, well, I'll take the book to Florence and I'll show you the book there.
The Count took the book to Florence in person, where he placed it in an underground bank vault overnight for safekeeping. The following day, he would take it to the inspectors. But then disaster.
That was the night of the flood in Florence.
November the 4th, 1966, saw the worst flooding in Florence's history. And water found what Himmler never could.
A flood came, and they weren't waterproof. So all the water with the gas, with the oil and paintings, they all went completely ruined.
This manuscript was ruined for the first 2 or 3 pages, and the last 2 or 3 pages, it was seriously damaged.
The first and the last pages were almost black. The writing looked like a negativa.
It looked as if this treasure had been destroyed forever. Months of costly and painstaking restoration followed, and the damage of the flooding was undone. Today, the Essenes Codex sits in the Biblioteca Nazionale in Rome. After nearly 200 years of holding the book, the Baldeschi-Baliani family had decided that the Essenes Codex should be available for all to see.
Little by little, we decided that this book was better if it was kept in a public place. And so then we gave it to the state, and it went to Rome, to the National Library in Rome.
Now that the oldest version of Tacitus's manuscript can be studied by experts from all nations, a very different picture of the ancient Germans than that promoted by Himmler has emerged. For a start, Tacitus was not as enraptured with the Germanen as Himmler had made out.
Tacitus attributes several clearly negative characteristics to the Germanic tribes. He basically speaks of their tendency towards drunkenness.
To pass an entire day and night in drinking disgraces no one. Their quarrels are seldom fought out with mere abuse, but commonly with wounds and bloodshed.
They were represented as liking their drink too much and having banquets, feasts during the day, this sort of thing.
They themselves lie buried in sloth, a strange combination in their nature that the same men should be so fond of idleness, so averse to peace.
He explicitly writes about their almost addiction to gambling. He also comments on what he describes as a form of laziness, basically.
They pass much of their time in idleness, giving themselves up to sleep and to feasting, the bravest and the most warlike doing nothing.
A sort of simple society, but one which has its flaws.
In fact, what Tacitus described was far from the perfect Aryan society claimed by Himmler.
In every household, the children, naked and filthy. They will be overcome by their own vices as easily as by the arms of an enemy.
It has become increasingly clear that the Ahnenerbe had only taken from Tacitus what they could use to support Himmler's theories of Germany's noble Aryan ancestors.
They blatantly misinterpreted, misread, and misquoted particular passages that didn't really fit their particular ideological view to make it fit their ideological view.
They've been highly selective. They've taken little bits of it, primarily around chapter 4, where he's talking about their racial purity, their blue eyes, their blonde hair, that sort of thing. And they've taken this work and very much, I think, made it what they want it to be.
And the Nazis had chosen to keep hidden another key fact about Tacitus. He had almost certainly never even seen any of the Germanen he was writing about, and had no real evidence for his statements about them. Some of his descriptions were plainly made up.
By the end of the monograph, you have this fantasy, bizarre sort of image of people with human faces but the bodies of animals. So it begins to enter the world of the fantastic. So you have to be wary of that when you're reading these texts.
Himmler also willfully ignored another fact. Modern-day Germans could not be the direct descendants of the Germanen.
The Nazis, in referring to the Germanic tribes, referred to them as ancient Germans or the old Germans. And that's exactly the kind of step that you must not make, because it is a simplification.
The Germani are different from the people that we would think of today as Germans. That's just the name that came to be used for the whole group of people.
They misidentified the German ancestors with the Germanic tribes that Tacitus describes, so you simply can't say that the Germanic tribes were the German ancestors.
The truth was that Hitler's Germans were descendants of many different peoples, not a single ancient tribe.
There was no German nation, and the whole tribal situation changed dramatically several times over the following centuries. So you can simply say, those are our ancestors.
But Himmler was unconcerned about the truth of what Tacitus really said and the truth of the origins of the German people. He desired the Asinus Codex to help promote the vicious and racist policies of the Nazis. And the tragic fact is that even without ever laying his hands on the original, he was still able to use the words of Tacitus to aid the Nazis in their murderous policies, which resulted in the death of millions. In 1701, Captain Kidd was condemned as a pirate.
Arch-pirate and the common enemy of mankind.
But with his death, the mystery of Kidd's hidden treasure was born.
Kidd was the only one who actually buried his treasure.
Over the centuries, many adventurers have tried to find his hoard. No one tried harder than Englishman Richard Knight.
He got taken over by the ghost of Captain Kidd.
This is a tale of epic sea voyages, unimaginable riches lost, secret compartments found, hidden treasure maps where X marks the spot, clues to the buried millions.
And I said, "Have you really found it, Richard?" And he said, "Yes, I have."
But Knight's daring expedition lands him in a Vietnamese jail, fearing for his life. He risked everything to unearth Captain Kidd's legendary treasure. Richard Knight was an unlikely treasure hunter. He was born in a quiet English seaside town, but he was destined not to lead a conventional, quiet life.
He was a curious figure, Richard Knight. I mean, he was not like many people you meet these days. You may perhaps have met them in the 19th century, but I don't think you met them in the 20th century, and probably even less now.
Knight was a young man in the early 1960s when he moved to Paris. As a bon vivant, he enjoyed all that the city and the changing times had to offer.
He was an adventurer, a chancer. I think that he wanted to enjoy life. He wanted to have seen everything, experienced everything.
But Richard Knight was an entertainer, an actor, and he had come to Paris not just to have fun, but to study with the master of French mime, Marcel Marceau. He even had some success in his career. Knight played opposite the great Jacques Tati in his film comedy Playtime as a confused drunk. But it seems he never settled anywhere for long.
He was happiest with the rucksack on his back. He was always footloose and fancy-free.
By 1978, Knight had travelled to Hollywood in an attempt to further his career as an actor. He never imagined his life was about to be given an entirely new direction. Not by a casting director, but by the actions of a man 300 years earlier. Captain William Kidd.
Suddenly he was inhabited by the ghost of Captain Kidd, another chancer from a much earlier century. And that's what I think happened to Richard. He got obsessed by the ghost of Captain Kidd.
Richard Knight was a voracious reader, and the books in the UCLA library drew him deeper and deeper into the extraordinary story of the infamous pirate. A tale of hardship and ill fortune, full of surprises.
Kidd was born in Dundee on the east coast of Scotland around 1655, but he went to New York, and it was there that he became a seaman, and he essentially worked his way up right through the ranks from a cabin boy to a sea captain. He became one of the best respected sea captains in the Americas.
In an unexpected twist, Knight discovered that when Captain Kidd sailed from London in February 1696, it was not as a pirate, but the very opposite, a pirate hunter, working for a consortium of wealthy English aristocrats and merchants. Britain's flourishing economy was largely built on trade with India. The ships of the British East India Company had been making huge profits, but the company had a growing problem: pirates. Disaster struck when English pirate Captain Avery teamed up with 5 other pirate captains to attack the Indian Mughal Emperor's convoy. They took a mammoth haul of over 500,000 gold and silver coins. The furious Mughal Emperor retaliated. His army attacked the company, and he threatened to put an end to English trade in India altogether. Captain William Kidd was commissioned by the British to hunt the pirates down. Not as an officer in the Royal Navy, but as a privateer.
A privateer is somebody who has a ship and a crew who gets a license, a letter of marque, to go out and hunt down the enemies of the state.
Kidd was given command of a newly built, powerful ship, the 34-gun Adventure Galley. So great was the crisis that Kidd's letter of marque, giving him permission to seize pirates, their ships, and their treasure in the King's name, was signed by King William III himself.
He was a well-respected, hard, experienced sea captain. He felt he had the skills and the ship and the expertise to pull this one off.
Kidd also had an added bonus. Britain was at war with France, so he could seize any enemy French ships he found. It was a confident Captain Kidd who set sail in the expectation that his share of the spoils would soon make him rich in captured ships and treasure. And the crew were also eager.
It was actually one of the best, most lucrative opportunities that these people had in the late 17th century.
The crew drew no pay. Their reward was a share of any ships and cargo taken, a system called no prey, no pay. Captain Kidd's 18-month privateer cruise was expected to pay from £500 to £3,500 per man, when the wage of a merchant seaman was just £45 a year.
An average seaman could actually make a small fortune from one good prize, one very lucrative prize. His normal cut would be enough to probably set himself up in business. He could buy a tavern, he could buy a farm, but essentially it was the big payload available to the late 17th century seaman.
As the adventure galley rounded the Horn of Africa, cannon at the ready, Kidd was expecting to encounter and conquer the pirates in their popular haunts off Madagascar and in the Indian Ocean. But there was a serious problem. They weren't there.
By the time he got to the Indian Ocean, all the ships he encountered were ones of allies, were English or Dutch ships. He couldn't find pirates, he couldn't find Frenchmen. So as the months rolled by and the crew weren't getting paid, things started to go badly wrong for him.
At the end of their planned 18-month cruise, not a single pirate ship or substantial French prize had been taken. The rebellious crew wanted to raid the next ship they came across. Any ship. They wanted to turn pirate.
When the crew knew they only earned money by taking other ships, they tended to take ships that maybe they shouldn't have.
The adventure galley had been at sea for 2 years with little to show for it. The crew took to torturing prisoners to find cash aboard any ships they encountered. Damning accounts from southern African ports where these ships fled began to arrive in London and New York. Captain Kidd was labelled pirate, and that meant the death penalty at the end of a rope. Knight learned that to calm his mutinous crew, enrich his powerful backers in London and save his own skin, Kidd needed a miracle. One big ship, pirate or French, loaded to the gunwales. As if in answer to Kidd's prayers, a cry rang out from the masthead. A ship had been sighted, a large, heavily laden merchant ship.
In January 1698, he hit the jackpot. He found a ship called the Quetta Merchant, which contained a lot of valuable silks, gold jewellery. It was the motherlode. At last, he'd found the right ship.
The Quetta Merchant was no fighting pirate ship, but when her captain showed him French papers, Kidd could snap her up as a legitimate prize. The riches aboard the Quetta Merchant are well documented. On board were pounds of gold, silver and jewels, as well as bales of fine silk and opium. Valued at up to £400,000 at the time, over £60 million today. Kidd's hunt for treasure was over. Now he could return home to New York in triumph to remove the stain on his reputation that he had turned pirate. But what seemed to be Kidd's salvation turned out to be a disaster. In New York, Kidd was swiftly arrested. The Quetta Merchant was not French, but belonged to a powerful Indian trader. Captain Kidd, who had been sent pirate hunting to pacify the Indian Moguls, had instead made the situation much worse. After capturing their treasure ship, the Indian merchants were demanding Kidd's blood. The British government were determined to pacify the all-powerful Indian merchants and desperate to safeguard the lucrative Far East trade. To buy his freedom, Kidd told of a treasure chest he'd buried on a nearby island. When the governor of New York, Lord Bellamont, dug it up, he found £14,000 in gold and jewels, worth today £2 million. But it bought Kidd no reprieve. The Indian emperor was baying for Kidd's blood, and the hapless Captain Kidd was shipped back to England to face trial for piracy and the hangman's rope.
This was no ordinary trial. This wasn't justice. This was retribution. His name was so blackened that everyone just thought this man's a pirate.
Kidd's big mistake was to fail to copy the French pass he was given when he captured the Quedar merchant. Without it, he couldn't prove that he had seized the ship legitimately. Now, at trial, when he needed it most, the French pass was nowhere to be seen.
The crucial piece of evidence, those French passes, which proved that he'd been behaving legitimately, had mysteriously disappeared. So he was essentially hung out to dry.
And Kidd faced not only a trial for piracy. Just to make sure he met the hangman, they also tried him for murder. In the darkest days of Kidd's voyage, when he was struggling to contain his rebellious crew's piratical exploits, a fatal incident occurred. The Adventure Galley encountered a Dutch ship, a British ally, and when Kidd refused to attack her, the crew were close to mutiny.
The gunner was the ringleader of a rather mutinous group of the crew who just wanted to capture it and ransack it, and that's when Kidd came to blows with the gunner.
Kidd, in his rage, grabbed an iron-bound wooden bucket and swung it at the argumentative gunner. The pail struck the gunner in the head, knocking him unconscious. Kidd had quelled the mutiny, but next day, the gunner died.
Killing a gunner is not a normal step for a sea captain, but in the instance of mutiny, those things are acceptable. And while Kidd knew he'd gone pretty far, he certainly didn't expect to be accused of murder for it.
In court, two of Kidd's former crew were given an amnesty to turn against him. They declared on oath that Kidd's fatal attack on the gunner had been premeditated murder.
The whole thing was just raced through so that they wanted a verdict, and they wanted one particular verdict, which is Kidd had to hang.
On the 9th of May 1701, Captain William Kidd was sentenced to be hanged. In a desperate attempt to escape his fate, he played what he hoped was a trump card. From his cell in Newgate Jail, he wrote a pleading letter to the government bargaining for his life.
I do most humbly pray that you will be pleased to represent to the Honourable House of Commons that in my late proceedings in the Indies I have lodged goods and treasure to the value of £100,000, which I desire the government may have the benefit of.
Kidd was claiming he'd hidden a second, much greater treasure, what would now be worth £15 million, and that if they would spare his life, he would lead them to it.
That's the germ that's sparked the interest of a lot of sort of treasure hunters ever since.
It was in this letter that the legend of Captain Kidd's vast buried treasure was born. So certain was Kidd about the hoard, he made it clear that they should hang him if he did not deliver.
If I fail therein, I desire no favour, but to be forthwith executed according to my sentence. Sir, your unfortunate humble servant, William Kidd.
The government, however, stood to lose a far greater sum than £15 million. All trade with India. It did not take the bait. The Indian moguls had to be appeased with Kidd's very public death. Under the rules of the Admiralty, Captain Kidd was taken onto the Thames foreshore at Wapping, London, between the low tide and the high water mark, to be hanged.
But his execution did not go smoothly. When he was turned off the ladder, the rope snapped.
He must have thought he's actually had the first lucky break he's had for about 6 years, where often that's seen as a legitimate reprieve. In Kidd's case, he was just marched back up onto the scaffold, a new rope was found, and he was shoved off into oblivion.
The Admiralty, however, did not consider merely hanging pirates enough of a deterrent. Kidd's body was chained to a post in the Thames until the tide had washed over it 3 times. The body, painted with pitch, hung for over 2 years in a gibbet by the Thames estuary as a warning to passing sailors not to turn pirate. But the legend of Kidd's treasure would never die. Almost 300 years later, in Santa Monica, on the coast of Southern California, Richard Knight was hooked by the mystery of where Kidd's treasure lay buried. And he was determined to find it. Knight launched his treasure quest from the University of California, Los Angeles Library. From that moment on, his life was changed forever.
He got this idea, this obsession in his mind, and from then on he focused on it. Rich was a fairly rare character in that he really wasn't interested in money. He talks about the value of Kidd's treasure and being millions and countless millions, but I think it was the attraction of the adventure to him.
As Knight investigated, he found that others had dreamed of finding Kidd's treasure. And like them, he discovered that Kidd had left behind a trail of clues. Kidd's treasure trail starts in 1929 on the south coast of England in Eastbourne. It was the hometown of middle-aged bachelor Hubert Palmer. He was a retired solicitor who loved to collect pirate relics.
One day in 1929, he came in possession of an old oak bureau that was reputedly once belonged to Captain Kidd. And it had a brass plate attached to the front, William Kidd, Adventure Galley, 1696.
Whilst writing at the bureau one day, Palmer must have leant on it a little more than usual. One of the supporting runners broke off.
When Palmer examined it, he saw on the end, in wax, a very small impression of an anchor. He guessed something must be inside this runner, so he carefully took the wax imprint from the end, and inside he found a brass tube.
Knight discovered that Palmer had found wrapped around the brass tube a parchment. It was a map. A treasure map. On it, X marked the spot, just as in the story Treasure Island. But there was more. At the top were the words China Sea, on the left a compass north bearing, and at the bottom Kidd's initials, WK.
Palmer immediately suspected that this possibly was the hiding place of Kidd's treasure. But of course, there was nothing on the chart to say where it was.
Far from telling Knight where Kidd's treasure was, Palmer's chart left him with a fascinating glimpse of a mystery. His head buzzed with questions of how to solve it. Fortunately, in the 1930s, Hubert Palmer had uncovered more clues.
After that, Palmer devoted a lot of his time and energies to advertising for anything to do with Kidd. Any relics, any chests, boxes, anything. Hoping to find further evidence of where this island might be.
Knight learned that Palmer advertised for any objects belonging to Kidd, and slowly he found them.
3 years after Palmer found the Oak Bureau, he was offered this chest.
The chest came from a nautical man, Captain Morgan, who claimed descent from notorious buccaneer Sir Henry Morgan. Another of his light-fingered ancestors had been jailer at Newgate Prison, and when Kidd was hanged, the jailer took the chest.
He could see inlaid in brass on the top of the lid a skull and crossbones and the letter K. On opening the chest, he was amazed to see inside, attached to a false bottom, a plaster cast skull fixed to a plaster cast Bible. It is believed the skull was there for the crew to swear allegiance to the captain or the crown. Hand on the skull with the Bible in the hand.
Disappointingly, the false bottom was empty, but there was something else mysterious there. When Palmer turned the board over, he discovered a mirror. What was it doing there?
Palmer examined the beading around here and discovered that this particular part of the beading quite easily came off. He was then able to slide the mirror and out like that. And lo and behold, to his great excitement, there was another chart.
Knight, just like Palmer, was excited by the fact that the outline of this chart was almost identical to the first one, but it contained more information.
515 southeast by 50 north, 36 northeast, 36 northeast rocks, 3 feet by 3 feet by 4.
Knight now became convinced these were directions to the treasure. But apart from the clue China Sea, he had no idea of the island's whereabouts. No latitude or longitude. He needed more. Fortunately for Knight, Palmer had another piece of extraordinary good luck. When 2 years later, he was able to buy a chest that once belonged to Captain Kidd's wife, Sarah.
This is known as Sarah Kidd's workbox. There is an inlaid brass plate on the top which says William and Sarah Kidd, their box, 1699.
Meticulous as always, Palmer measured the box inside and out. There was a discrepancy, leading him to suspect a secret compartment in the base.
Palmer discovered on the end that there were 2 or 3 hidden nails or screws disguised in there. He eventually managed to undo these and work this beading edge off, and this revealed the hidden compartment underneath. He probed inside and discovered a parchment showing another chart.
This chart was more detailed. Knight first tried to decipher what had to be Kidd's own writing around the map's edge. After much puzzling, he had it.
360 yards, veer right, north 3 stumps, 87 feet from the centre of triangle in left rocks, 98, 20 feet east of skeleton of Lieb.
The final word remained a mystery, but Knight knew these were more detailed instructions of where to find the buried treasure. Crucially, this chart showed latitude and longitude. Knight now had what he needed, a way to pinpoint the island itself. But there was a snag. The longitude was hard to read. If the longitude was read as 3130 east, that put the island in the Sudan. Perhaps the mark before 31 could be a figure 1. But 131.30 east put the island 200 miles off the Philippines in open ocean. Knight realized there was a fundamental problem with the longitude. The modern maps Knight examined used the International Zero Meridian passing through the Royal Observatory at Greenwich, London. But then he realised charts in Captain Kidd's time referenced other zero meridians. The French favoured Paris, the Spanish Cadiz. The high mountain of Tenerife was also popular with seafarers. The longitude of the treasure island would depend on which chart Kidd had been using.
So when looking at a chart of the 17th century or earlier, you had to know what meridian was in use at that time. And that's one of the problems with these charts. What meridian did Kidd use?
Richard Knight began to study atlases from the 16th to the 18th century. They were beautiful and ornate, and none recorded longitude from the zero meridian at Greenwich. Knight applied the Kidd treasure map longitudes. The first, 3130 east, put the island in Nigeria. No good at all. But the second longitude, 131.30 east, indicated the island lay somewhere between Burma and the Philippines. That meant the South China Sea. This was more like it. China Sea, just as on the Kidd treasure maps.
Slowly he put together this idea that he had solved the mystery that nobody else had.
Knight now consulted chart after chart, scanning thousands of islands, looking for an island that matched the old parchments. Then, at last, on French Admiralty Hydrographic Chart number 3686 of 1879, there it was. Hon-Tre-Lon. Right shape, right orientation, right name. Hon-Tre-Lon is called in English Grand Pirate Island. But it was right in the worst possible spot imaginable. Hon-Tre-Lon was in the territorial waters of a country which, after a long, bitter war with the USA, was hostile to Westerners. Communist Vietnam.
And nobody had looked there because of the Vietnam War, because they were communist, because the politics had changed. It wasn't a place where you did pitch up and suddenly look for treasure. So he decided that he was the person who was going to brave all the odds and go and prove to the world that his theory was right.
International treasure hunting is an expensive business. Knight, looking to fund his expedition to Kidd's forbidden treasure island, set out his stall in Sydney, Australia. Using all his skills as an entertainer and storyteller, he tried to lure wealthy Australian businessmen into his romantic quest.
Of course, he was always on the lookout for a backer who might help. So, he used to pick up these extraordinary figures, go off with them, trying to persuade them that to come in with him to this sort of madcap mission.
Slowly, Richard Knight managed to draw together a small group to buy into his dreams of treasure. But his charm would never convince the Vietnamese government to let him go on a treasure hunt. He would need a cover story. To explain his need for a metal detector without arousing suspicion, Knight and his backers decided to write asking for official permission to prospect for minerals. On a business letter headed the Australian Pacific Geological and Mining Company, they made their pitch, ending,
hoping we may have your favourable consideration for this application, as we believe that it may have considerable interest and potential benefit to the Socialist Republic of Vietnam.
It didn't work. There was no reply from the Vietnamese. Knight decided through a travel agent to simply ask to visit Hon Tre Lon as a tourist. This time he did get a reply, but it exactly followed the Communist Party line.
We regret the areas you have stipulated in your request are not now possible to visit. Only published areas through our approved agency in Australia possible.
The political climate of the Cold War left no legitimate way for Richard Knight to get to Hon Tre Lon. Gradually, his backers backed away.
And so he was now left on his own. And all his backers dropped out. And rather than say, well, I'm not going to do this until I've got it properly organised, he thought, well, what the hell? I'm going to do it myself.
By June 1981, Richard Knight had decided that the only way to reach his treasure island was to mount an illegal expedition. The first step of his personal invasion was to get as close to Vietnam as he could. He decided to base himself in Bangkok, Thailand. But this was still over 300 miles by sea from Hon Tre Lon, a very dangerous voyage. Finding a boat for hire that was large enough but inconspicuous enough to sneak him within striking distance of Hon Tre Lon would be tricky. On top of that, he had to find a willing crew.
I think Rich found it difficult to persuade totally legitimate, solid citizens to go in with him because of his nonchalant character, his habit of whizzing off and disappearing, or not being totally practical, perhaps, or they came to that view. And so he was thrust on unusual characters like himself.
Knight now took a leaf out of Captain Kidd's book, offering a share of the treasure. But still, he could induce no one to volunteer for such a risky voyage. Then a friend introduced him to a fresh-faced 18-year-old American, Fred Graham.
But in the end he found, the perfect person, really, a young photojournalist who also wanted an adventure.
Fred Graham had left home in California with a new camera to become a war photographer. But with no experience, he couldn't break into the profession. He was at a dead end, and Richard Knight's treasure hunt offered just the kind of excitement he was looking for. Knight offered him 15% of the treasure. Graham negotiated his share up to 40%. They had a deal. But just like Kidd's crew, if they found no treasure, he would get nothing. The decision to go with Knight would cost him dear. Just 2 days later, towards the end of May 1983, Knight and Graham were in high spirits as they set their bow into the Gulf of Thailand. Knight had persuaded a local crew to accept his bizarre charter, and they were off on their adventure to unearth the legendary treasure of Captain Kidd. It took several days and nights to reach the island Knight had picked out from the old charts, but fortune seemed to smile on the voyage. The Gulf was the haunt of real 20th century cutthroat pirates. Knight and Graham were well equipped for treasure hunting with a metal detector and digging equipment, but not for rappelling boarders. But they passed through without incident. After days at sea, Knight and Graham landed on their treasure island. Knight's crazy plan seemed to be working rather well. All was quiet, and Knight decided that they would wait until first light to unearth the legendary treasure of Captain Kidd. It had, after all, waited almost 300 years. It could surely wait one more night. But what he didn't know was, they'd been seen. The Vietnamese had endless questions to fire at Richard Knight. Who are you? Where are you from? What is this equipment for? Any answers to do with treasure hunting were met with scorn. They were convinced he was an American spy working for the Western imperialist CIA. Knight and Graham were imprisoned in rat and cockroach-infested cells, separated in solitary confinement. If Knight couldn't overturn the spy story, he faced a similar fate to Captain Kidd. Execution. Again and again he was interrogated. Again and again he had another confession to sign. What he told them of his globe-trotting acting career was to them an elaborate cover story. What is all this equipment for? Who, they kept asking him, was his contact in the British government. Richard Knight didn't have a contact in the British government. He wished he had. Not a soul even knew he was missing, let alone where he was and the danger he was in. Captain Kidd at least had treasure to bargain with. Knight had nothing. More than once, when the militia took him from his cell, Knight believed that he was to be shot.
I think he weathered jail quite well. He had all sorts of diversionary tactics to fall back on.
He took to playing imaginary games of golf, reliving visits to Blackpool, analysing gambling systems and besting imaginary opponents with a homemade pack of cards.
He could always find something within himself to withstand those long solitary and potentially dangerous situations, largely because there's a huge imagination, I think.
But as month after month passed, Knight fought for his sanity. He gave each corner of the cell a function, one to look to the future, another to look to the past, one for prayer, another for comedy, But after 4 months with no contact from either the British or US governments, it seemed he might never get out alive. But he was unaware there was one faint hope. Just before the ill-fated treasure hunt, young Fred Graham had wisely arranged for a letter to be posted to his father if he wasn't back in 30 days. He wrote,
"If you're reading this letter, something has gone very wrong. Either I am dead or in prison."
Graham's letter saved them both. With the news that Knight and Graham had gone to Vietnam, the British and US embassies launched investigations. The Minister of State at the Foreign Office, Richard Luce, also the Knight's local MP, wrote to Knight's mother.
"You can rest assured that the embassy will continue to press the Vietnamese to let them know where your son is being held."
The diplomatic activity worked. The Vietnamese admitted they had arrested Knight and Graham for violating the territory of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, and they were in prison. But now the Vietnamese played pirate, demanding a ransom of $10,000 per man. But neither the US nor the British government would pay a penny.
The British government would not pay a ransom, would they? They don't pay official ransoms. They always make a thing of, we don't pay, otherwise it just happens again.
By the 17th of May 1984, Fred Graham was free and returned to America, 40 pounds lighter than when he had left home on his adventures. His family and friends in California had raised the money, limiting his captivity to less than a year. The unfortunate Richard Knight stayed in jail. The British Vice Consul in Hanoi wrote to Knight,
"I know that Frederick Graham's departure must have left you feeling depressed, but please be assured your mother and friends are still working hard to raise the money to pay your fine."
After over a year in captivity, they'd raised only $2,000, still $8,000 short. Knight waited in prison alone through June and July. But then in August, the British consul wrote to tell him he'd had an extraordinary stroke of luck.
A particularly generous offer from a British citizen living in California means that the balance of the fine is now available.
In early August 1984, Richard Knight received the greatest treasure of all. His freedom. In the years that followed, Fred Graham's thirst for adventure remained unquenched. He succeeded in working as a photojournalist, and also, ironically, for the CIA during the US war in El Salvador. Now, he is an author of political thrillers. But Richard Knight never stopped looking for the treasure.
He doesn't seem to have regretted having done this, or having done it in this harebrained way. And he never lost the dream. I know he didn't lose the dream because, you know, when I last said goodbye to him, he was off out back to China to find a backer to go and pick up the treasure.
Knight, stranded in China, out of funds and out of luck, telephoned a stranger for help, fellow treasure hunter George Edmonds.
Well, what could I do? I mean, he needed money to get out. So I agreed to send him some money if he agreed to tell me the true story. And I said, "Have you really found it, Richard?" And he said, Yes, I have.
Edmonds never saw Knight or his money again. Richard Knight died in Carlisle in the north of England in 2002. So what is the truth of Kidd's legendary treasure? There's no doubt that he did bury a chest containing £14,000 that was dug up at the time on the orders of Lord Bellamont, Governor of New York. But what of Kidd's claim to have had a further £100,000 hidden away?
The question is, of course, was Kidd 100% truthful about how much shiny gold and jewellery he actually found and hid?
Did Captain Kidd really intend to guide a ship to a vast buried hoard? Or was the treasure a last desperate bid for his life? Did he intend, once at sea, to pull off a daring escape?
I'd be very surprised if any treasure is found, any of Kidd's treasure ever comes to light. I think Lord Bellamont basically managed to get his hands on the entire haul.
Nothing, it seems, puts off a dedicated treasure hunter. For George Edmonds, this dark cloud still has the glint of a silver lining. He believes he has properly deciphered the Kidd treasure maps.
The charts do lead to a treasure, but it is nothing whatsoever to do with Kidd.
Edmonds believes he has located a new treasure island where no treasure hunters have been before, just like Richard Knight. Just like every serious treasure hunter, George Edmonds plays his cards very close to his chest while he seeks backers for his expedition.
I can't tell you where this island is because it is the result of 8 years of intensive research. Everything is in there. The solution of the clues on the charts and where this other island is, what the treasure is and where it is.
It seems that dreams of buried treasure never die.
So it's still out there. I'm very confident of that.